So here we are again for another episode of Walking on Cinders, and this is chapter 12 now we're at, and that is going to be really good. Hopefully you're looking forward to this, and you can hear it, and we're going to be reading, as I say, chapter 12, and that's going to be the work today. So this is Walking on Cinders. This is my novel. It's 10 years old this year, and I'm going to read you from the next chapter, which is chapter 12. At the end of a long dusty track which led through the middle of a village was a large old farmhouse built from the local red brick. It had large bay windows on the front which looked out over the main street, and small windows at the back from which there was a view of the pasture that lay behind. The paint was peeling off the walls, and the cement between the brickwork was speckled with tiny air holes. There was an old wooden gate at the front of the yard, and behind it a small black and white collie dog padded up and down, keeping watch on all who passed by. This was very much a working farm. A mile up the road, the cows were grazing in the fertile fields, while piglets squealed at their sty doors and waited for their mother to feed them. Inside the farmhouse, traditional cheeses were produced in the dairy, while meat was cured in the pantry. The farmer himself was a middle-aged man of perhaps 50 years, with a balding head. He wore the same blue overalls and a flat cap all year round. He was well known in the village and spent many an evening in the local cafe. The main focus of the villagers' attention, however, were the farmer's twin daughters. Renee and Belle were stunning young women, well educated and destined to go far. Both were extraordinarily talented singers, and they longed to be trained, but on their father's small income it had never been possible. The girls didn't let this get in their way though, and with their earnings they would venture together into the city to keep track of the changes in fashion and adapt accordingly. The girls' voices, auburn hair and flirtatious humour made them irresistible to the local boys. Their father, however, kept an eye on his daughters, for he didn't want to find them compromised by one of the many farm labourers that had husbands, or he had husbands already in mind for his girls. Jonathan and Andrew occupied the large manor house further up the country lane, and prided themselves on being directly descended from the French royal family. Although the family's power had been relinquished a century before, it didn't matter. Everyone knew their history and they respected it. The aristocratic young men couldn't resist the twin sisters' charm or beauty, and before long they were besotted. On a bright afternoon in the middle of the previous summer, when the farmer had been employed on the land at the back of the manor house, he had noticed how the boys felt. The farmer saw an opportunity to secure his family's future, and within a matter of days 2 weddings had been arranged for the following year. Jonathan and Andrew had accepted the proposal immediately, but little did they know, or the farmer, that as the month for the wedding would draw nearer, events would unfold that would prevent the loveless marriages arranged by their father and change the twins' lives forever. Dusk was beginning to settle as Belle Lavette made her way up from the dirt track that led to the farm. Her long auburn hair was hooked back into a ponytail, and as she passed by the window of the village cafe, she pouted and admired her reflection in the glass. Belle looked somewhat flushed, though as if she had had a close encounter. It was true that she had discovered something very interesting, and she couldn't wait to tell her sister Renee about it. The gates of the farmyard grew close about a second, and in her excitement Belle ran the final few metres up the stone pathway. She found the front door was open as usual, and from the pantry wafted out the smells of traditional French bread made freshly that morning. Belle bounded into the kitchen and called her sister's name out several times over. Their father was still out in the field, and there was no chance that they might be overheard. "Renee? Renee!" she shouted, as her sister padded lightly down the hallway. Renee appeared before Belle in a short white dress fastened with a belt around the waist, and finished with a tiny golden sunflower embroidered at the edges. She was a picture of beauty. "Renee! Renee, you'll never guess what I've discovered." Belle was grinning from ear to ear. "No," she replied, taking a little or no interest in what was being said. "Let me guess. You have found another set of lovebirds cavorting in our barn, no?" "No," Belle replied, even more impatiently this time. "That was this afternoon, and besides, I couldn't see who they were, just dark figures huddled close. But now I think I worked out who it was. I found this t-shirt ripped up." Belle reached for her satchel and pulled out the remnants of a pink and blue stripy vest top. She had looked pleased with herself. Renee, there has been someone down there and I am the one who found out about it. And what we gonna do? And what's it got to do with us? Renee pondered the question carefully while playfully twirling strands of her hair around her fingers. They are only getting a bit of what everyone wants, no? But on the way back, Belle protested again. I was thinking about this emblem I saw on a bag in the barn. It must be his, and I knew I remembered it. The United Army is red, white, and blue. He is a British soldier, Renee. Fancy that, a British soldier in our little village, eh? And the girl with him, she was the prettiest girl I've ever seen. I thought you said it was dark, huh? Oh, well... Belle was jumping up and down, frantically trying again to reach into her satchel. He must have dropped this when he was climbing the ladder into the loft. You will see what I mean. She handed her sister a torn photograph of a beautiful young woman. Renee sighed and looked towards the far end of the room. Ah, he is taken then, and she is beautiful. Little point in trying. No, wait, there is more. Belle couldn't control herself. I was thinking that he cannot stay in our barn forever, so we might have to go and tell him to... Belle moved closer to her twin sister, whispered in her ear, and they both giggled uncontrollably. More soldiers, eh? Belle, you are not as silly as you seem. If there are more soldiers, then we are very lucky girls. We have to go and tell him right now. Belle looked deep into her sister's bright blue eyes and was glad that she understood. It is a good job that they came to get my sister. It is a good job that I came to get my sister. She always knows what is the best thing to do. In amongst the hay, it was easy to forget everything other than the relationship between two people who happened to be in the same place at the same time. For Ewan and Jennifer, their relationship was never really official. It was merely that it grew over time into something both of them wanted, but neither of them would admit to. It was never planned for them to bed down amongst the rafters of a hay barn, but fate intervened and they found themselves diverting to a path on which they never set out. The previous afternoon, for it was getting late even before Ewan and Jennifer had been discovered at the roadside, the farmer in the rusty red tractor had entered the village by the church and trundled down towards the centre of the town. There was no denying it, the village was certainly quaint. The buildings were held together with large stone pieces and striking wooden beams which adorned the exteriors. Both Ewan and Jennifer noticed that in this community everyone was friendly, for people waved and smiled at the farmer as he passed by. They soon reached the centre and the little red tractor slowed to a stop and Ewan jumped down and looked around. There was no obvious choice of direction, so they would simply have to go on their instincts. For a while they wandered through the back streets hand in hand, but as the evening began to fall they realised they needed somewhere to rest for the night. They had considered several locations in passing, but many of them seemed at best rudimentary. In fact, the real solution, a small hay barn at the top of an overgrown track, was the only thing they could easily consider as the best of a bad bunch. It looked watertight, warm, and provided privacy from the outside world. This was something that could only have been dreamt about during the cold nights they had spent since leaving the crash site. It seemed like a lifetime ago. Together they dragged their belongings off the road, their bags heavy at their feet, before climbing the rickety ladder to the hayloft. There, behind some old barrels which Ewan guessed were full of wine, Jennifer found a pile of old sacks which they could use as a blanket, and she began to make a makeshift bed amongst the hay. They slept far better than they had imagined they would, waking from a dreamy daze when the sun was already high in the sky. It was not surprising, given they had endured many sleepless nights, and Ewan could not resist the tempting smile on Jennifer's face, which drew him back to her side. Soon after they had awoken, he had felt compelled to check that the coast was still clear, but her hand on his reminded him that such necessities were really not as important as they might first appear. At some point, Ewan must have woken again for a few moments. He was still half asleep, yet he noticed two important things. The first was Jennifer's arm resting right across his body, her long hair tickling his cheek, and the second was a pair of eyes squinting up at him from the dark below. Surely it was just a hallucination, and his quick retreat to the realms of sleep forced him to dismiss it. But he was wrong. Silly even. For as his eyes fell shut once more, he instinctively drew in close to the woman lying beside him. The eyes, which had surveyed the sleeping man, turned into a tall and tanned figure with auburn hair. She tiptoed towards the ladder and climbed up as quietly as a mouse. Peering over the top of the hayloft, she saw two people lying in the hay, covered sparingly by the old sacks. This was all the girl needed, and she slid back down the ladder and skipped towards the doorway. no longer caring if the couple above were to awake and discover their visitor. Ewan was woken with a start, sure that someone was shaking him roughly back to the real world. When he opened his eyes, he was shocked to find two giggling faces staring down at him. It took several seconds for him to grasp the situation, but when he did, he realised the consequences. He didn't know who these girls were, but he had to get rid of them before they woke Jennifer, and they both had to face the consequences that came from sleeping together in the farmer's hay barn. "Hi," Ewan yawned, still dazed by the situation. In turn, the girls smiled sweetly, replicas of each other's. It wasn't the best situation in the world, but you just, could you wait down the ladder for me? "No," both girls replied together, their smiles not faltering for a moment. "No?" Ewan queried, suddenly finding himself blushing uncontrollably. "We want something from you," the first of the girls said simply, placing her hand on Ewan's shoulder and turning to her sister. "What are you going to give us in return for making use of our barn?" Ewan found the situation embarrassing, and it didn't help matters when Jennifer began to stir next to him. "Look," he whispered through gritted teeth, pulling up the old sack. "I can make it up to you. We just need somewhere to stay for one night, and maybe you can help us as well." The twins thought about this for a moment. "We," they replied in unison, and Ewan wondered if they were going to constantly talk like this. "But if you promise, and I think we have given you quite enough already, no?" Then the twin on the left whispered something to the other that slowly began to make them back away towards the ladder. They were only halfway down when one of them shouted up again. "Oh, and by the way, we have found your little picture and your girlfriend's ripped-up t-shirt. They must have fallen out of your bag. A pity, no?" Both twins giggled uncontrollably again at this last remark before jumping down from the ladder. Ewan looked around the hayloft and considered his options. There was no way to avoid the twins, and in any other circumstances he wouldn't have minded in the least. But in their current situation he was embarrassed, and these Auburn girls had a point. He was once again in the wrong. Beside him, Jennifer turned in a sleepy stupor, now almost awake. Her beautiful blue eyes opened slowly, and her golden hair fell across her face. She was the picture of innocence here amongst the hay. She rolled over under the covers and looked up at her companion. Only then did she realise something was really terribly wrong. Ewan was sitting bolt upright, his eyes darting around the barn before finally meeting her own gaze. "What's wrong?" she whispered, reaching for his hand and yawning. "Jennifer," he began, thinking about what he was going to say. "Jennifer, there are people here. The people who own the barn." "What do you mean? How do they know we were here?" Ewan thought about this for a moment. Although he himself had to consider how the twins had found them, it seemed less than important. "I don't know, Jennifer, but they did. I just woke up and they were here. It's embarrassing for them to see us like this, but I managed to convince them to wait down there until I had warned you." "Oh," Jennifer replied, pulling the sack tighter around her own body, clearly nervous. "Well, I guess we need to go down and see them." Ewan nodded, still a little stunned, and reached behind the nearest barrel. His hand fell against a pile of soft material, and he realised that the girls had not taken their clothes and hidden them. That would have been the icing on the cake. Both of them dressed in silence, assessing the situation. Love can overpower rational thinking, but where else were they expected to sleep that night? Ewan jumped down the ladder first and stood opposite the twins. He didn't say anything. He didn't want to. In the half-light of the barn, he merely looked at their attractive faces and wondered about them. When a sleepy Jennifer dropped down from the ladder moments later and stood beside her strong-willed companion, the twins began to giggle again. Her hair was a mess and she wore no makeup, but she was still as pretty as the picture that Belle Lavette clutched tightly in her hands. "So, who are you?" she began, first addressing Jennifer, before motioning to her sister, who moved to stand beside Ewan. "You have got to be very important to have a stack of signed photos ready to hand out to the first soldier willing to immerse himself over you." Ewan immediately felt guilty, and his face flushed with embarrassment. Renee Lavette was not a silly girl, and the moment that she noticed his discomfort, she placed an arm around his waist and drew their bodies closer. "I'm Miss..." Jennifer began, sensing she had no alternative other than to reveal her true identity to these girls. "No, Jennifer," Ewan interjected, blocking her words escaping. Belle turned to look, and Rennie raised her eyebrows in surprise. Now, silly soldier boys have to be punished," she said knowingly, turning her head so that she was eye to eye with him, before grabbing his face and kissing his lips. It was a long-lasting kiss. She grinned, her eyelashes dancing before him. Does she kiss you like this, soldier boy? Jennifer wasn't having any of it. These girls were cheeky and she would stand her ground. Look, I miss marmalade, she sighed, watching as Ewan's face fell. And this is Ewan Roberts. He is a soldier in the United Army based at the Thames Regimental Barracks in London. We are nothing special. The twins gasped, seeing this was perhaps a big mistake. You mean to say that you are the Mademoiselle Marmalade? Belle shrieked, looking again at the photo. You know, I would never have guessed that. Yeah, well now you know, Jennifer replied simply. And if you don't mind, I'd prefer it if you removed the clammy little hands from my man. She was almost glaring at the beautiful Renee, who by now had dropped to sit by Ewan's side, equally returning her dangerous stare. Look, it was an easy mistake to make, Ewan said, realising he had to do something to ease the tension between the three women around him. We never even noticed at all, Belle said blankly. And well, we wanted to make you feel that little bit maladroit, awkward about sleeping in our barn. We come here when we want to escape from Papa, and we never dreamed that anyone else would use it. This was an obvious lie, yet it sounded wholly convincing. Jennifer faltered for a moment and noticed a chink of light seeping in through the dusty window. It must be so warm outside, and she almost wished that they could be sitting together in the sun. She longed to be back with the others, with Chris, who would look after them, and with Thomas, who would make her laugh, while she and Ewan fell passionately in love. Playing the bad cop took her way out of her depth. Ewan wanted to escape, to take Jennifer and to run, but of course he didn't. They had spent too many nights alone, and it was important that they reach the French barracks in the next few days. Don't leave the village, Ewan, Chris had said the last time they were all together. But surely things had changed now. Was it still possible to stay here? These girls might be bad, but they could also be fragile, broken even, and that could be their ticket to freedom. The whole barn shook with a rumbling vibration that woke Ewan from his daydream. He saw the more talkative of the twins disappear through the open barn doors, and the next thing he knew she was calling back to them. Belle! Belle! It is Papa! Or will we have to hide from him? Her sister's reaction was immediate. Grabbing Jennifer by the arm, a look of sheer terror across her face, she ran towards the doors, leaving Ewan to reach for their backpacks and follow suit. Outside, Ewan saw the root of their problem. At the far end of the track, a middle-aged man wearing a flat cap was approaching on a rickety old tractor that made deep tracks in the soft earth. Perched on the footwell was a grey-haired sheepdog, and sticking out of the trailer behind was a dangerous-looking pitchfork. Belle whispered something in Ewan's ear that he couldn't understand. She urged them on past the barn and towards a gated field that neither Ewan or Jennifer had noticed before. Here they jumped in turn through a gap in the hedge, not knowing what they would find on the other side, and they prayed for their freedom. They landed in a pile. There were stinging nettles and brambles all around them, and the contents of their backpacks felt less than comfortable. But there was nothing that they could do. Here they were hidden from view, and knowing this, they waited until they had heard the dilapidated tractor crunch back into gear, turn around in the track, and head back down towards the village. And that's chapter number 12 of my novel, Walking on Cinders. Tomorrow evening from 6 p.m, I'm back with chapter 13 of the novel. Thank you for listening tonight.